So if you're here, you're probably here from my web app portfolio, just looking at my software, what I've built, what I've done, who I am, what I do. But for this particular project, I decided I actually want to go behind the scenes, not just showcase what it is from the client side, but actually see the code behind it. If you also want to learn React or software, you might actually pick a thing or two from this. But essentially, this is just I thought let me actually describe what goes on behind the scenes, right? So this is an air cargo shipping platform for Nigeria. And essentially it's the UI was done. One of my coworkers back then, and I implemented the front end and back end, but essentially it was majorly the front end. Majorly the front end I'm going to talk about in this recording in this video. So to start off with, this essentially is a React component. But before I get into all of that, I want to show you the code. So let's start from basic, right? This is VS Code. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm just going to run through it briefly. But to start with, the main parent component, that is this index.js file. So essentially, what is React? React is a framework, right? It's a front end framework, just like Angular or Vue. But the thing is, with React, you have the flexibility to use several different libraries. React is not essentially it's decoupled. There are pros and cons to that, but yeah, in this, yeah, look like I was saying, this is the parent component. What we're doing here is you have what they call the React document object model. This is where you render the application component into this element. So essentially, what that means is, if you've ever done HTML before, there's something called the DOM document object model, which is the interface between your HTML and your JavaScript. So essentially, it's just a way of accessing the HTML elements and manipulating them to fit exactly what you want to do. So you have stuff like get element by ID, get element by class name, get element by tag name, query selector all. These are just different ways to manipulate the DOM, right? So if you're going to get an element by tag name, for example, you have on other list of items, you have anchor tags, you have division tag, you have span tags, you have ordered list tags, you have table tags. Essentially, that's what you be getting it by. But this is not HTML class. I'm not going to go too much into that. What I'm trying to explain here is just that essentially there is a in the HTML file, right, which I'm going to show you. There's an index. This is actually what you deploy on the server, part of what you deploy on the server. But here you see that there is you see this? There's a division called ID root. So what actually is happening is you are rendering this application using the React document object model into this division right here, which then displays the whole application. So this is why you call this an SPA, meaning that essentially it's a single page application, not server side rendered. So you're getting all the data and information passed through a router essentially. So what I'm trying to say is this: you're not making a request to the server each time, to the web server each time to get a page. Everything happens on the web browser. All right. So yeah, back to it. So this is the starting point. You have this here. So now that we're here, we're going to go into the app. So now this is also, as you can see, these are called, actually, I'll call this a child component of this because it's rendered into this, and it's also index.js is technically a component, you know. So here is where you have your routes defined. Your routes essentially enable you navigate through the application. Your browser router, that's what the browser router is. It's from the React library, React router DOM rather, as you can see. The React router document object model library. You have your switch keyword as well, switch component. Essentially, this just helps prevent how will I explain this to you? So basically imagine this. You see how you have this route here, this path here. If like essentially they did not have a what's the word? Okay, give me a second. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it to you guys. Okay, so think about this. You know how you have the exact keyword here, which essentially means that get this route by exactly how this is defined, right? So if this wasn't here, what's going to happen is the landing page, your authentication page, your about page, everything is going to be in one component. So there will be like child components in a parent component. So you're going to have this when you go to this, right? Just watch this. When you go to this, I'm going to show you right now. So you see what happens? You're going to have this, and then when you scroll down, you're going to have let's watch this. So you see what I mean? And then you're gonna have, you see, you're gonna have this here. So it becomes a child component because of how the route is defined. So then it shows up within that same component. The same thing with if I go to the about us, it's gonna show up here too. You see what I mean? So they don't become distinct. Essentially, they're not more distinct. But the thing is, with the switch prevents that essentially, right? So assuming we're even skipping this home, for example, and we just decided, okay, you know what? Let me take out the switch. Just watch this, right? And then I decided to go to about again, for example, right? So you see, so back to what I was saying. So the switch essentially helps with um route parameters. You see how this has been defined here as ID, and stuff. So imagine you essentially took out profile, like this definition from here, right? So what's gonna happen is if you don't have the switch, right? Every route, so us log out about how it works, because it has the same casing, it essentially would show up this component. So what I'm trying to say in essence is this: wherever you have this colon, it means that this is not hard coded. So any value essentially could be taken as is a request parameter, right? So any value could be taken as that parameter ID. But then if essentially we took out this, because I call them casing, because essentially this routes are actually case, um, with the slashes, they are kind of case sensitive. So if you take out this, for example, right? You take out this, for example. What's gonna happen is both components, so auth logger about how it works, would all show in here for ID. So if I did decide to do this, watch this. Would recognize the other route about logout how it works as this route if this was taken out because of the casing. But yeah, let's carry on. So this essentially routes between, you see, each page. That is what that is there for, right? That's the React router working. Now we're gonna be going into the actual. Let's start with the landing page. Good. So you see, this is a functional component, right? This is a functional component. You have class components and functional components. This is a functional component. And essentially what you would see on here is the libraries imported for use first. So React library. I'm going to explain what the context is. This is what they call React hooks. So I'm going to explain what use context does, use effect does, use state does, and all of that. So in React, you have some key things: states, props, context reducers, and yeah, I'll get to that. So here I'm essentially using I've defined step by step, line by line. I've just declared or given a functional expression as landing, right? I have then defined a constant history variable. This means they cannot be muted. It's immutable, right? I've defined a variable which is going to take the methods that use history has, right? Essentially returns the method and stores in this variable. And then I've defined a log out function here, which is not being used, as you can see, because this logout function essentially sends a get request to the back end to log out the user. I'm not going to get too much into backend right now because this is essentially the front end video. But yeah, and then this is what they call Zenable promises. So essentially, then after it makes a request, it gets to respond and it catches if there's an error. If there's no error, it takes the user back to the home page. Now, this is what they call JavaScript syntax extension, right? So what I've done here, and with GSX, you have to have a parent division. You can only have one parent division. You cannot decide to have, for example, another. It's going to give you an error, right? So yeah. So here we have the first division, right? Then we have another division, right? Which essentially this division just wraps everything. Another division that actually has the class name background section one. I think that's CSS essentially. So that just essentially defined what, as you can see here, the background of the section one, right? So this essentially is what you're seeing. So this image to the right, and then the background color white. Essentially, that's what you are seeing here, right? And then it says, of course, top right, like I told you, then no, do not repeat the image, and give it a padding bottom of 320 pixels, which is what this is, right? Now, actually, which is what this is. Now, this is CSS. This is also known as CSS class. I'm not going to go too much into CSS, but then yeah. So we then have the nav bar landing, which is essentially a navigation bar for the landing page. I've used Bootstrap, by the way, here. So you see the navigation bar, you see the class name. If you go to Bootstrap, I'm just going to show you so you can actually. So you go to bootstrap.com, right? You would be able to actually say, and you go to components, you go to navigation, navbar, you would actually be able to see the explanation of what this certain class names do, right? Now, in here you have a link. So this is another division with an unordered list of links, which essentially is what you are seeing here, right? And each link goes to the path, which then renders the component, if that now makes sense. So when you go to how it works, it renders the how it works page. If you go to about, it renders the about page, about component in quotes. Now, that is what this is. Then you have I have gone ahead to use the material UI library here. This is for animation. Essentially, you'd see that when I refresh the page, what then happens is you see that this grows in. It's an animation from material UI library. Um, and what I've set is here is when the page loads, set it to true. Essentially, run the animation, and that is after 2 seconds. So 2000 milliseconds means 2 seconds. So if this is true, run it within 2 seconds, right? Yeah, and this is what is run. So you see, this is a heading one tag. Easiest way to book air cargo. This is a line break. Then you see that this also fades in. That's what this animation is. That is this. But as you can see, I essentially set it to. I haven't given it timeout. That's why it's that way. Um, then the get started button actually takes us to login, right? But let me finish this. So essentially, this is what the landing page is, right? So this to an animation, you see, yeah, and all of that. This is the footer actually. Then let's actually go to the login. So what I've done here is that's authentication. So what I've done here is I have created an authentication component which has tabs, and in each tab essentially renders a component that is the form for the sign up and the login, right? Um, so as you can see, I can sign up right now, but then, like I told you, it's more of the front end, not the back end. So I wouldn't really want to run you through the push request to the server side, the auth controller, and storing of the user's information on MongoDB, all of that now. This is the front end description video. So yeah, So as you can see, if you go to login, you see what I've gone ahead to use here now, as you can see, is state. So I am using the use state React hook, and you see that what happens is I'm going to just show you this real quick. It's called the React Dev console. Right, this actually enables you to see your React components, your props, your states, and all of that, and all of that. So you see that okay, before I do that, you see that here, what I've gone ahead to do is you have an initial state, which I'm calling previous state here, and it's empty. They're empty strings, right? It's an object with an empty string. And essentially, what then happens is when you type information on here, what I'm doing is I am setting the state, as you can see. Can you see that? So when you type information on here, the state is actually being set. So that is on this input changed. Set the state, because essentially what you're going to do is you're going to post that state to the back end. So you're going to post that information to the back end, right? So you see here, that is what this is. This also is to manage the error. So if there's an error, show a flash message, and everything at first. This is set to false. This is boolean. Also loading set to false. The message is set to an empty string as well. Now, use effect. If you've ever done um used a React class component before, essentially it's the component did mount um function that it kind of it takes the what's the word I'll use, the it basically behaves like that, like it has the behavior of the component did mount function. So essentially all this is saying is when the component does load, run this first. If you've ever done Android engineering as well, essentially this is what you would call the onResume method, not the onCreate method or the onStart method, but the onResume method. So when the fragment or the activity actually loads, right? So yeah. So what I've gone ahead to do here, okay, so we're submitting a form, and this is an asynchronous function. We're using an asynchronous function with await keyword. Essentially, if you know JavaScript, if you've ever done JavaScript, there's stuff called Zenable promises, right? So you have callbacks, Zenable promises, and now async await. So essentially, it's been an evolution. That's what I'll call it. Because with callbacks, you can have callback hell. Zenable promises, you can technically have callback hell, because then you keep saying dot then, and all of that. But what does async await do? So, or let's actually rewind. What is a promise? A promise is basically an object that tells whether a function has been resolved or not, right? And so in this case, I think await just says to bring it to lowest term. The best way to explain this is, you see, if the promise for this request, because this is a request to the login, has not been fulfilled, right? The rest of all this code will not run. That's what you need to understand. Sorry, of all this code here will not run, right? So basically, what happens is await literally describes itself. No other event of code would run if the promise here wasn't resolved. If this also wasn't resolved, this wouldn't run, this wouldn't run. So that's what that does, right? So it just makes sure that the promise has been resolved. It tells you the eventual completion of whether a promise has been resolved, which means it's successful, or it's been rejected, which means it fails, right? So yeah, so Axios is a library where this I'm using fetch. This is native JavaScript request. But yeah, I'm basically making a request, push request to the endpoint. Okay, I'm just going to show you what it looks like, just so you have an understanding of, so you know, oh, where does this go to and all of that. So this is the login endpoint, right? This is the route. Just hold on a second. Don't get confused, right? And what then happens here is you don't need to think too much, but this is the route. You post the request to this. This runs the passport. I'm using passport library in here. I don't want to get too much into that. Authenticate using the local auth method. You have Twitter, you have Facebook, and then if this is successful, then the user is logged in. If it's successful, then it gets to this method which is in the controller. Right now, if you go back to that controller, yeah, it logs the user. As in, it logs that the user has been logged in, logs the request, the user and the request body, essentially that has the user and all of that. But yeah, too much backend now. Back to this. So yeah, that is what this is. So I am making the request. I'm waiting to get the response back. I'm logging the message and the status. Now, if the status is if it fails, I say you're not logged in. It reloads the page. It then shows the alert. So this is what it's called a spread operator, right? So essentially, I'm spreading the initial state, so I have access to the other properties in that object to essentially manipulate them. So what I then do here is you see that the initial state is false. So what I then do is set flash to true and then set the message to the incorrect message, right? This message can actually also be getting from the response. Um, but then that if it fails, if it doesn't fail, so if the status is 200, then it goes to the create order component. This is the route that takes you to create order component whilst passing. Remember what I told you about request parameters? You can take any value, so that is what this is. I'm passing in the user ID as a request parameter, and then the alert is true, and then the message it essentially shows the message getting from the response, and loading is also is true. Now you then come here. That is the on submit method function. That's when this form is submitted. Now you then see we're going to see this in action. So if my password was wrong, just watch this. So I'm going to give an arbitrary password. You see what happens? So you have a 4.1 error. I give a flash message, which was what you are seeing. Um, that is what this is here, and it slides right down. This also are essentially for animation. It's from the material UI library as well. And then if the flash is true, that's if error state of flash is true. This is what is called a ternary operator. If it's true, show the alert, right? Else, don't show any alert, right? So it shows the alert with the error message, as you can see here, right? Now you see that source there. If you check this, you see the post request body, you see what I sent, but then you see the response, you see unauthorized because that password is invalid. Now, let's say I did log in with an actual password. Oh shit, that's still wrong. Okay, hold on. That's my password. I might have forgotten my password actually. Um, just give me a second. Um, Sorry, just give me a second. I think I forgot my password. Hold on a second. Wow. Okay, great. Got my password. And what I do is when I do log in, I log, you see, myself. I just log it at the back end. But again, this is not a backend tutorial. So we're not going to go into the verification token and all of that, the salt, the hash, all of that. So, yeah, so this then takes you to this component, which is the create order component. Now I'm going to close this, and that is the next component we're about to see, the create order component. Now, here what you have is two radio buttons. a form. This is takes a division of column 6. If you know the Bootstrap grid system, 12, a row with 12 columns. So what I'm doing here is essentially this takes in a date, the name of the receiver. I'm not going to do back end, so I wouldn't actually show you this being stored, but I will just show you what actually is happening. So all of this are actually stored in when you click get a code, it's actually stored in the database, and this is actually stored using a map. So when I say using a map, okay, so this is a date, this is a string, so name, string. Now the origin and destination is stored using a map. So that is to say, if you look at this here, you see I have a map for the airport. The origin is the key, and the value is what the user actually does put in. So if you go to the React Dev Tools again, you would see over here, you see the state, you will see all this information actually being passed. Um, you see down and stored, right? Same thing with this. You see all of that. Yeah. So you see everything is actually being passed down and stored. Um, yeah. So this essentially is how I'm populating the state. So on here you see the initial state, everything's an empty string, and then I'm setting the state as the information as the input does change. So you see on change, I set the state, I set everything here. So e dot target the value means event dot target the value. So the value in that event, you know. Um, yeah. Well, how I'm posting it to the back end is through a map. So that's what you have. I've declared my map on here. Yeah, sender and receiver map. Um, they both are in a participants map. And essentially, what you have here is, like I said, airport set the origin destination. I can actually show you what it looks like in the back end, just so you're not lost. But yeah, so I'm gonna open Smartsky orders. So you see, this is actually what it does look like, by the way. So you have the state map, you know, the origin, you have the participants. You see, this is the map with origin and destination airports. Under then you have participant map, you have the sender and the receiver, right? Yeah, but let's get to back to what we're doing. Oops. Yeah, so that is that. Then now that I'm logged in, I can actually show you my account. So this is the account component. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah. So in this component, as usual, you have the state. You have what I've done here. I've passed the user ID using the props. Um, to so basically, I'm getting the user ID from the route. So let me just show you what that is. Um, so if you look here, you have the properties. You have match, parameters, ID. So that essentially is what I am getting here to be used. Now, I was getting that essentially to persist it through some parts of the application, but that is not the best way to do it. There's something called, you can either use cookies or sessions or local storage. So if you go to application, you go to local storage. This is from a different application. Essentially, you can store the user ID using local storage and essentially then persist it through the application using a context, or just essentially using the method get, you know, get storage or get local, get the item using the key, you know. So this, let me just show you what I'm trying to say. So this is a whole different application, but just so you have like an understanding of what I am saying. So you see here, so what I'm doing is I'm getting the value for the key current user here, right? But yeah, let's get back to business. So yeah, that's what we have here. So you can also update the profile. I can decide to do that. That sent the push request to the back end as well. I'm just gonna update that so you actually see it in action. Oh yeah, so so what has happened is I am trying to, as you saw that error. So what has happened is I am trying to update the profile, but then I'm calling the trim method on all the inputs, and essentially I have not put an edge case to check for if the length of the string. So if there actually is something in the input to trim, do you get? And there is nothing in the other ones to trim, so it threw that error. So let me just show you what that is. So if you look at this, users, um, sorry, I'm wrong place. Where were we? Account. He should be here. Yeah. So you see, I'm calling the trim method when I run this function, right? That is, I run the function when I click on update. But then at the same time, I have not set, like, there is nothing, so there's nothing for it to trim, right? So now if I actually did do this, if I actually did fill in everything, right? California. Boom. You see that it works fine. And then if I did decide to refresh the page, you're going to see that it's pulled from database. You see that? So yeah, now that is account. Then you have payment method. So this is just to store your payments update card. I'm going to show you what that actually looks like. Payments. So yeah, what I've done is I've done a rotation on the card, and then you have a boolean to check whether this form shows or not. So what I do is essentially on that button clicked, that is, you see this, I run this function show form. So what happens is show form is false, set to false, and what then happens is I set it, when I click on it, I set it to, I alter it basically. I set it to true, and then if it's false, if it's true, I set it back to false. So if you check this, oh no, mistake. So if you check this, the React Dev Tools here, do you see? So watch this. See, sets to false, and then it's set to true, set to false, set to true. So that's what it is. And then you have the orders tab. So this actually is where you would see each individual consumer or client order. So the client can actually see their order, right? What they ordered. So this is the order component. And now the order component actually has two child components. So you see that I have what I call the, let me just get this out for you, transactions component, not the details. Where my order? Yeah, transactions component and the shipment card monitor component. Now let me open the orders component. Cool. So now I'm going to explain to you how I built this navigation over here first. Then I go into this component because this is a component, and then I go into this component. Cool. Now this essentially I have just done, and I've used tabs essentially, which is what you are seeing over here. So actually the navigations rather, right? So they are from the React Bootstrap library. And what I've done is I've given a class name of flex column, so it shows in the column view. And they're all links, right? And each one routes to the independent component than it needs to go to, right? So that is how I actually did this. And then I've also given it a container fluid, which means it extends all the way to the length of the page. So that's why it's at the edge. And if I show you the class that I have used here, sorry, my CSS file, which explains how I gave it the background as well. So this is just a media query for saying that at a minimum width of 600 pixels. So I'm saying for web screens, not mobile screens, this is what it should look like, right? Um, so yeah, that is what you have over here. You know, that's what you have over here. I've essentially defined the class name. This you see this over here. If you look behind the scenes, all these nav links are actually just anchor tags. So I've accessed the color and changed, altered them using the anchor tag as a class name. So the nav drawer, this is what they call also CSS specificity. So you have the nav drawer, and then I use the tag name to access it, right? And so, by the way, if you don't understand anything, you can honestly just drop like a comment and I explain to you, because this I'm not going like I'm really not going into beginners level, so you might not understand a couple of things. Like I'm not explaining how what this property is doing behind the scenes, or what DOM is behind the scenes, or I'm not explaining a couple of things. So if you do have questions, you can ask me as well. Okay, that is how that was built. Then you have the transactions component, right? Now, if you look into, so you see, this here is where you have you see what I was saying? Child component, child component, child component, child component, and then these are props. I'm going to explain to you everything here, but let's start easy. Okay, so this essentially is a library for a random UID, so unique user identity. That's why it's called unique user identity, right? That's what this actually stands for. Um, so here you have a state, the initial state as an array of objects. This is arbitrary data, test data, not actual information from an API. So you have total shipment count, you have active shipment, you have complete shipment. So all I'm doing here is I am just passing in to the card, because this is a card, right? Now I'm rendering this card into these divisions on this parent component. But in this card, what I'm doing is I am passing this information as properties to this card, and then rendering it inside the card, checking the props, and then essentially rendering it in here in the design. So if I show you, let me show you something. So you see the property here, you see the property here will be 5. You see that? If I did change this to 6, you see what happens. I change this to 10. You see what happens. So essentially what I'm just doing is I am passing in, I'm getting I can also log the property I'm passing to the card. So you see that all I'm doing here is essentially passing the information from here into this card as property, and then render using the property key name. So you see shipment name is, this is an array, so array of objects. So the first position is position 0, and in position 0 the ID is store shipment count, and then position 0 the count is 0. Position 1 the shipment count is 5, so I pass it here and I pass the ID, like I said, arbitrary data. Then on here I'm using that, so I log this. If you look on here right now, you see, so that is me logging the props for each, you see, each card shipment monitor. You see that there? Yeah. So now I can remove it. Now we're back here, so you understand that bit. Now, transaction essentially is a table with a table heading, table row, and table data. That's what transaction is. So you see arbitrary data again, an array list of objects. I'm going to explain this. Basically, what this is cool. Essentially trying to. I'm going to explain to you why I got to where I'm starting from the back, because that's the first thing here. So what I've done here, I've created a map with a sender and receiver, all right, and then the map has key valuing pairings of two strings. The first string is a unique user identity and the name of the user. Second, like I said, this is arbitrary because what you ordinarily would do is make a request to the API, get the participants, loop over the map, get the key, get the value for get the key and value for the receiver. So if you get the receiver and the sender, then you can actually pass in the values into your front end, right? Now, what that's why I came here. Now to go back, what I've done here is I've created an array of month names, right? And I'll tell you why I did this. Because when you're using the date object in JavaScript, essentially the date object, what it tends to do is you have months, there are 12 months in a year, right? But then it doesn't start to count from 1, it starts to count from 0. So technically you have a length of 12 items, but then the last index position for the month is 11, right? So technically, if I didn't define this, what will happen is, let's say the date that the current day today, for example, is 11th of November, right? So technically, this is the 11th month, right? But then in the date object, it would be the 10th month, if that makes sense. So this would be 0, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You see, that's how the data object works. So what I've done here is I've created a function. This is a function expression. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a new data object, and then essentially this is going to return day, month, years format here, and then I'm returning that. Basically that's what this method returns. Sorry, the type that it returns. In JavaScript, you actually don't define the type, but yeah, if this was Java, you would put date or time format or something and return that. Now, here, what I'm going to head to do is I've defined the state. I've put a random ID, but I'm slicing it. So the slice method essentially just let's say the ID was this, right? The slice method just it's going to take from position 0 to 8. So basically, I'm trying to get 7 characters, right? So it's going to take from 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, I'm just going to get this characters. That's where it stops. If I do 9 as well, it should just get 0, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I just stop here as well, right? It doesn't actually pick the last character or the last doesn't pick the value in the last index in index 8 or 9, right? And then yeah, this is an object with properties, text, and spending. I'm sure by now you understand objects and all of that. But if you don't, like I said, this is not a beginner's video, so you might just, if you do want me to create one, I can actually create one. But this, like I said, is came across my portfolio, trying to know who I am, trying to see what I do. I thought to explain this project, right? Now, that's what all of that is. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying for each transaction, or for each order with transaction, essentially if it's pending, because it's going to loop through and get all the see these are essentially is an object with properties, right? If this pending property is true, so if the order status, that's order status dot is pending, right? You use dot operator to access this object, access the properties inside that object. If it's pending, that if this is true, then essentially set status pending, right? I'll explain this to you. Else status complete. Now these are classes that have different colors. That's why this is that. So if you look here, you see status pending color is red, status complete is gray, which is what you have over. That's not even working here. I probably need to check that out. Okay, but yeah, that's what that does. Yeah, then you have I'm looping through each order and I'm essentially creating a row with the data. That's what this is. And then on the click of that transaction, this is like, think about this like a get route, like you're getting a list of information. Then this is actually what you call the show. So you're trying to get the independent information of that transaction or that order. So when you click on it, what you have here is, I'm going to the path name. This is the path name that shows the details, and then I'm passing the state. Now the state I am passing is the order ID, the sender, the sender, the receiver, the status, all of that. So all this information, that's what I'm passing, which is what you are now able to see here, and I've rendered it in here like this. So now we can actually go to the component that shows the details, and yeah, now I have this, and that's what you see here. Passing all the information, right? And then what you have here is order details. If you inspect this as well, sorry, give me a second. Oh, this is just me looping through the participant values, or getting the participant value. I'm actually trying to think because I know I passed this as props. I'm thinking. Yeah. So when you pass it as a state in a route or a link, you access it via the prop. So props dot location dot state. Yeah. So you're looking at that, and then I can access it. Beautiful. And then this is the map with the user ID, right? With sender and receiver, which is what I'm using an iterator to loop over it. Right? Yeah. It gets the value in sequential order from the map. Also, probably not the best method, but like I said, this is more front end. There's so many ways to improve on your code, stuff. But yes, we have this here. So you see the date created, the day, the month, the year over there. See? I mean, it's the current day. That's what you're seeing because this is the current day. But yeah, so that is this. You can create a shipment like we saw before. Then about us, I guess. Um, yeah, so that is. If this video helps in any way to just understand some bits and pieces of front end or React, you can let me know. If you actually want you see that it doesn't show me as logged in anymore. That's because I do not use local storage to persist my user ID to persist my session, you know. But I want to give an example of an application that actually does use that. So if you look at this, for example, that I'm currently working on, right? I'm just going to close this one actually. If you look at this that I'm actually currently working on, yeah, um, you'd see that in here, you see, it actually just took me straight to like my profile. Why? Because essentially, I am stored, like my state is there. But if I do log out, right? If I do log out, um, actually now that I try to remember what password, what am I even logged in as? Oh yeah, yeah. If I do log out, you see that it brings me here. If I try and go to you see, because I'm not logged in, you don't see log out, you don't see this is just random stuff. I haven't like put a middleware to prevent like users from getting here yet. But you see, you come here, if you look here, you see that there's no user, there's no storage where, there's no user essentially stored for persisting, you know, or to for session, you know. So come back here. If I log in again, then you see, and now the user actually can get in. But yeah, now you see log out here, you see add profile, and then you see that, yeah. So this is another. If you want a video, this I'm not gonna do a video of this of the behind the scenes for this application, because yeah. But if you need more help, just if you do, sorry, want me to, yeah, if you do need more help with front end or anything, you can drop a comment and stuff. Um, yeah. But one quick thing I would like to explain is just regular expression, which is a key like for forms, like logging and stuff, what the regular expression is. And regular expression essentially is just how you check for valid characters and valid casing before you log. Just like how you before you log in on any site, it tells you, oh, you need a minimum of 8 characters, you need, an uppercase letter, a special character, a lowercase letter. That's what regular expression actually does, or you can use it for. You see, so in this place I'm checking that the user has a password of lowercase letter from A to Z, uppercase from A to Z, and a number between 0 and 9, and any of the special characters, and a minimum of 8 characters and a maximum of 16 characters. That essentially is what I am doing here. I'm not going to show you how I did like my full implementation, but essentially what this does is I'm then checking if the user when the user puts in the password, does it match the regular expression. Now the match method essentially returns either a null if it doesn't match, or an array of the character if it does match. So if it does match, I'm going to get an array with the characters that match. So it does work, and then he stores it. So if like see if it's null, then do this. If not, I'm not going to run through the whole thing. But that's what regular expression is. And one thing I would just like to show that I think would really be of good use for engineers or anyone that wants to understand regular expression better is Regex 101. It's an application that you can actually use to check your regular expression. So you see, if I did put this here, see, it tells you essentially what your regular expression is saying. So you see, assets position at start of the string, positive look ahead, matching any character except for line terminator, matching previous token between 0 and unlimited time, matching character persistent. So you see, it tells you what exactly this is. So you see now it says your regular expression does not match subject string, but if I did this, you see there's a match. If I did this, let me see, because I want, okay, let's say so still doesn't match. Wow. But yeah, you get the point. That's essentially what it is. So yeah, if you liked this, you can just drop a comment or whatever. Yeah, have a good day.